second step. It's in our minds and it's under discussion.
I'm just trying to remember the question now.
Carbon prices, 2013.
Oh, 2013, too late. Look, in my mind, it's too far away. I think it's too far away. I think the setting of that time frame has been done with what Labor believes is a realistic time frame to get it negotiated to rebuild that consensus. I think ideally we'll be able to do it before then, but that's not what my party has formally committed to. I think there'll be an ongoing dialogue, debate, discussion about pulling that time frame forward because, quite frankly, the sooner the better. I think we all, in this room at least, agree on that. As far as the issue of power stations and the current levels of pollution, we've committed that power stations built in coming years need to have far stricter pollution rules around them. We don't want to lock in high emission stations or allow high emission power stations that damage the environment to persist, and we're putting in place systems that reduce the pollution of the carbon-fired ones. But we differ from the Greens that we acknowledge that coal-fired power stations will be around for some decades to come. So we're looking at regulating how we capture their carbon emissions and how we reduce their carbon pollution and the whole clean coal agenda. So we have a big difference with the Greens in that regard. But it's not an area that we are ignoring. And we will make sure that any new coal-fired power stations meet new best practice coal emission standards and are carbon capture and storage ready. It's probably a good point to have a go at the Liberals because they're cutting some of those programs that we've put in place. They've listed those initiatives on their list of cuts of things that they would not fund if they're in fact elected.
So you're looking at natural gas?
I'll come back to that. Yeah.
John Hibbard, Conservation Council, ACT Region. We've heard some positions from your parties, but my question is about how you will personally act to represent the people of Canberra and meet their aspirations if you're elected next week. So, given that the clearing of native vegetation and the logging of our native forests contributes between 15 to 20% of Australia's total greenhouse gas emissions, will you, and I mean you personally, will you strongly advocate in your party room for urgent legislative action to halt these activities, to end the forest wars, and thus immediately reduce Australia's greenhouse gas emissions, not by a miserable 5%, but by between 15 to 20%?
It would be very easy for me to say, yes, I will advocate that in my party room. It's actually something that I think is completely relevant in this debate, but I need to say to you, being honest, it's not an area of detailed policy that I've been closely personally involved with. I have a different policy focus in the work that I do within my caucus, and I try to construct my arguments and make a difference in the areas where I have developed some expertise. That said, I will give you an undertaking this evening that I will pay far more attention and engage within that debate within my party and argue for a more progressive stance. I think that is reasonable and consistent with the general aim and the broad commitment I've given about addressing climate change.
I'm actually not sure whether to say yes I will or no I don't need to, so maybe I'll just say you just described green policy.
Before we take the next question, thanks for that, Lynn, because one of the problems, of course, with an emissions trading scheme is when you set a target, that's exactly how much pollution you'll have. Having said questions shouldn't be longer than a minute and answers shouldn't be longer than 2, doesn't mean we have to fill it up. So, looking at the line of questions, if you don't need to ask both questioners, then please don't, and if you can ask it in less than a minute, please do. And similarly, if if the candidates can answer it in shorter time, don't feel you have to talk on, because there will be questions coming and coming and coming, which is why we're here.
Hi, my name's Monica Florm. I'll make my question really quick. It might be, in fact, a bit whimsical. I did like the last question, and I did like your answer to the question, Kate. When I say it's whimsical, I appreciate that you can't tell us, you feel you can't tell us what you personally think, and I think I understand the subtext of your answer to Bob Douglas's question straight up, which was that Labor has calculated what it can and can't promise in this area in order to be re-elected, and maybe there's a subtext of trust us and we'll deliver. I won't ask you to tell us what you personally think and whether it's enough, but can I ask both of you, could you commit to tell us if in the future you're disappointed with what you achieve? Will you tell us in the future whether or not you're satisfied with what you've achieved?
Look, thank you for that question. I feel kind of awkward because, you know, in terms of subtext, I think Labor has made its position clear, and I'm trying to get the balance right between making sure you understand what the Labor Party's position is and try to still give you an insight into my personal view. And I think I can do that by saying I will always be arguing in the caucus that we need to do more. That's my personal view. I think you can assume a lot from that about how I feel about things. And I think I have been clear that my personal view is that we ought to be doing more. And if I could just point to evidence of how I can manage to have a conversation with you as your elected representative and still be faithful and I think true to my party's position. When we announced we were going to delay consideration of a CPRS, I expressed my opinion very clearly at the time. I was profoundly disappointed, and that was the sentiment that came immediately to my head, and I expressed it publicly. So what you will get from me is a sense of what I think personally and how that relates to Labor's policy. And I have that particular ability to do that as a Labor caucus member and as a backbencher. And the way our political system works, if I'm given greater responsibilities at some point, as I've had in the past as a shadow minister, then I have greater obligations in how I express the party's view. And I will try to explain those to the Canberra community if that opportunity arises for me. So I don't think I'm being too coy. I don't think I'm being misleading, and I think I'm trying to be very clear in how I have a responsibility to convey my party's policies to you, and I'm trying to also give you an insight into what I'll be pushing for within the caucus. And thank you for the question.
Well, I think leadership at its most fundamental, it's about turning up to get the job done. I think it's about persisting, but I also think it's about risking. So I would expect to be failing, and I hope I have some, if I'm elected, some spectacular heroic failures, because that means I was trying to be part of achieving something spectacular and heroic for us and for the future. So I'm always happy to talk about failures as well as successes, and I think you learn from both.
Now, I think the next question is from the elephant in the room.
I'm liking the elephant with the speedos.
Well, Gary Humphries didn't turn up, but there were kind of two appeals to the Liberal Party where the Liberal Party likes Speedos, so that was... couldn't find any red ones, unfortunately. It's hard to find Speedos in winter in Canberra, but... So yes, I'm Roman Zethoven, Rota Elephants, Australian Youth Climate Coalition, and I think for a long time climate change wasn't really discussed, although now it's kind of it's widespread in its acknowledgement as an issue, but what isn't widespread, and I think the current elephant in the room, is the actual scientific reality, and the fact that if we don't take serious action right now, we are at risk of having climate catastrophe. And I think a lot of especially the major parties' positions are at risk of, if they're replicated throughout the world, creating that climate catastrophe. So my question is, do you think it's possible for our politicians to actually try and create the consensus rather than going by the community consensus, actually try and create a consensus in the community about climate change and about the kind of action that will actually stop climate change?
Yes, I do. I really think that's the case, and we all have a role to play as elected representatives to provide that leadership. And one of the great problems at this point in time is, well, there are always sceptics out there. The minute one of the major political parties says we're not going to participate in a consensual discussion or agreement that there is a problem that we have to fix and then just argue about the detail, when they shut the door, that changes everything. And it did change everything. And I don't want anyone in this room to be, under the incorrect illusion that that didn't change everything. Because had it not happened, we would have got a CPRS, however flawed in the eyes of the Greens, and perhaps some of you. It was a starting point. We've now gone so far backwards because one political party has determined to exploit the political opportunity by playing into that, and it's an extremely destructive, divisive tactic that I think is so dishonest because it is not reflective of the scientific facts of the matter. So I think in response to your question, you are absolutely right, and what you're calling up tonight is the fundamental failure of the Conservative parties in this country to acknowledge the science.
Preach it, Kate, that is absolutely true. One of the things I reckon we could all do in the room tonight is actually, one of the things you might want to do when you go home is email your Conservative elected representative or your Conservative candidate. Begin a conversation, phone their office. I'm not just talking about Gary, I'm talking about anybody who's representing the Conservative part of politics. Tony Abbott's Liberal Party are climate deniers. So have a conversation with them. Don't just protest outside the building, get inside the building. If you ring the switch at Parliament House, you can ask for an office and you are put through immediately. Clog the phone lines, clog the emails, clog the faxes. Get active because it makes a difference. I'm an activist, that's what I've done. It works, it works. The question. I think and I hope it is possible for politicians to find a way forward. If it isn't, we're in trouble. If social democracy doesn't work, and if, as I used to say to my children when they were little, if we can't use our words, all we have left is violence. So it is incredibly important that we find a way forward together. But I think what it's going to take, rather for me than waiting for a pretty passive citizens' assembly, and by the way, I think citizens' assemblies are bloody fantastic ideas for a lot of things, but I think in this case it is very clear. Every credible opinion poll that's been done in this country for the past few years returns a view that the overwhelming majority of Australians want swift and decisive leadership on this issue now. What we don't have, apart from Bob Brown, are leaders, political leaders who are prepared to stand up and be counted. We don't have leaders in industry and we don't have enough leaders in the community. What we do have is hundreds of thousands and millions of us who are conserving energy in our own homes, who are having shorter showers, who are changing our light bulbs, who are driving smaller cars, who are doing enormous amounts of activity to lighten our carbon footprint. And what we're asking of our political leadership is that collectively, through our political leadership, we can lighten our national carbon footprint and deliver international leadership to our region and beyond. So we need to step up. It is my dearest wish this election that the Greens do have balance of power and a stronger say and a much stronger negotiating platform in the next Parliament, because that's the kind of agenda you're going to see from us on every front.
G'day, my name's Paul Mulhall, former Labor Party member, born again Green Party member. I'm wondering whether either of you think future generations